event. It made me reflect on why it is so important to create the space and time for such a gathering, particularly during the time where we are living through a pandemic, a time of social, economic, political upheaval and violence. Our vibrant, busy learning community, like everywhere in the world, is working to address the challenges of moving from a defined physical space to a place that has few boundaries, where one of the biggest challenges and opportunities is to tackle belonging, to create the time to truly focus on the gaps that this pandemic has laid bare in every aspect of life. I have taken the time to look at my people's past and history, to remember what they've encountered and what their collective knowledge has to offer me today in my work. To our Idawa, our clan stories, which instruct how we honor and participate in the interdependent relationship we have with creation and with each other. I also appreciate this pandemic has created a space to rethink many of humanity's actions, decisions, and impacts, like racism, climate change, and resource extraction. Today, an excellent example of creating time for thoughtful dialogue, for reflection, and to identify what is important in building a mutual relationship, which has the opportunity to create transformative change. I'm going to share with you my traditional opening. This is part of my spirituality. For Nisga'a people, we usually do this at the break of day while greeting the sun. We do this to acknowledge our first relationship with Greek mystery, our relationship with creation, our relationship with the land, our relationship with each other, and to begin each day with gratitude. Furthermore, to be mindful of those around us. It's not a religion, but a way of life. We do this individually and collectively when we gather in our family circles, in our huwilps, our houses, and pedek, our clans, which form the basis of our social and governance structures. When I'm asked to provide a traditional opening for a meeting, gathering, or event here at Ryerson, I see it as an opportunity to share with you its role in my life, how it's utilized in my community, as well as to invite you to join me, to let go of the busyness in our minds and use these words to bring us together and center us. As we gather this afternoon, let us bring our minds together. I encourage everyone to participate in active listening, be present to each other, and respectfully engage each other. I invite you now to join me by lifting your hands as I say my thanksgiving. However, there is no expectation to do so. Great mystery. We lift our hands in thanksgiving for the gift of this day, for all of the opportunities embedded within it. We are thankful for the gift of air and water, which sustain all of us in creation. We are thankful that all aspects of creation have carried out their responsibilities so that we have life. Let us be mindful that as human beings, we have been given responsibilities, which many have neglected. However, each day we are given the opportunity to change and to carry out our responsibilities. So for those yet to come, they may enjoy the gifts of creation and life. Keep in our minds that this disease comes from our environment and has entered our human realm. It will take our collective effort to find the medicines and knowledge. Since we can't send it back, we will have to find a way to live with it. As we gather this afternoon, I ask that you join and remind us to use both our hearts and minds in listening and speaking, so that we are mindful of their impact. I call upon the spirit helpers to join us. May we see what is possible and to continue to hold each other up. Let us turn our minds to those that do without food, without shelter, those who are struggling, those who are ill, those who face persecution, those who have begun to make their spirit journey, and those who have crossed over into the spirit world. Let us be responsible and mindful of our words, actions, decisions, and behaviors, and their impact on those around us. As we bring our collective minds together, I encourage each of us to walk with kindness, respect, and compassion, to be conscious that we have the ability to create a community and a world where every person's needs can be met. Finally, for us to be aware and respectful of our interdependent relationship with creation, air, and water, so that they continue to nourish life for the next 7 generations. And Timo, thank you. I'll turn it over to Daphne, the Dean, to share the land acknowledgement.
I'm acknowledging the land on which Ryerson sits, but during this time of pandemic, I want to extend the land to include where everybody is calling in from and where everybody is present for this call. Ryerson itself is in the dish with one spoon territory that brings us onto the land of the Anishinaabe, Mississauga, and Haudenosaunee. It's important for us to recognize dish with one spoon. The spoon recognizes sustenance and food security and sharing and community. You'll notice that there are no knives in the dish with one spoon. And we enter into a relationship which we are experiencing today, I hope, under a banner of friendship, respect, peace, and the intent of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as is my practice, I usually dedicate a land acknowledgement to something I feel deeply about or someone I know. Today, I want to dedicate this particular acknowledgement to the families of the murders and missing Indigenous women who have suffered so greatly. And I also want to thank our faculty and staff who are learning, as I am, about Indigenous peoples and all of the tremendous history and potential of this community. So that is my land acknowledgement. I'm Daphne Taras. I'm Dean of the Ted Rogers School of Management. I'm a labor relations professor, so my expertise really resides in union management affairs and representation issues. And I've been Dean for 2 years and look forward to learning more about what we can do here. Chief Laforme.
Hi, good afternoon. Ani, Buju, Nagani, Anishinaabe, Nini, Stacey Laforme, Disnakas, Credit Dunjaba, Mainga Dodam, Mississauga, Anishinaabe, Dawa. So I just told you where I'm from, what my Anishinaabe name is, what my clan is. So I'm a Wolf clan on my father's side, no, my mother's side, who was a Mohawk woman. And I'm a Turtle clan on my father's side, who is of the Anishinaabe people, the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe. So I have two clans I sort of sit between or claim. I'd like to also acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it. I acknowledge the many nations that walk this land in the past, the many nations that walk it today, and welcome you to the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Anishinaabe. Now, I always include the treaty lands because without the extension of the treaties, there would be no settlement upon our lands. And so the history without those treaties would be much different. And so I think it's very important that the treaties are acknowledged whenever you do a land claim land acknowledgement. And I would just like to say, and I don't want to get into a whole debate or discussion because that's what I'm here for, but the dish with one spoon, while I love the ideology and the actions of togetherness and unity within it, there's quite a debate about the dish with one spoon and where it is. Was it in Montreal? Was it, in the Americas, in Canada? Where exactly was it? And on different elders will tell you different things. So that's always a challenge. That's interesting, to research that. And actually, what I'm doing right now is spending a lot of time with asking my own elders, but also asking Canadian Settler Society through their resources to do their own research so that we can get a full understanding of exactly where it is and who was all included and what it meant. Having said that, I do think the concept behind it is a worldwide concept that we should all respect and embrace. So that's sort of who I am. And so, Miigwech. I must apologize if I look miserable sitting here. I'm not. I just have one of those faces.
Well, for those of
Not when you smile.
For those of you that have just joined us, this is an inaugural discussion to a speaker series that TRSM will be hosting through July and August. And we are beginning with a conversation between Dean Taras and Chief Laforme. Dean Taras, I wonder if you take the opportunity to maybe give us an overview of what TRSM has been up to in this time.
Well, we've basically been grappling with our responsibility as both educators and academics. And I would have to say that we began with SANA organizing a meeting of professors. I know that we have a number of people within our school that are keenly interested in advancing knowledge and are friendly to the idea of incorporating knowledge. I know that SANA deals with, I know Sonia, Patricia, Michael, who's here on this call, Dohan, Janet, there are a lot of people in law and business, but we have not yet really reached a stage where we have, in a systematic way, in tackling how to change our curriculum and what to do. We have recognized the Truth and Reconciliation's call to action, in call to action number 92 in particular, which is the corporate sector's responsibility to adopt the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People and to figure out both its standards and its intent. So we have a number of initiatives. I'll just go through them quickly, but we could talk about any one of them much more. We will have an Indigenous healing garden to transform our very underutilized, brutalist looking courtyard into an Indigenous themed green space and learning space with plant medicines to improve physical, mental, and spiritual health and decrease anxiety. So we will be inviting people into a healing garden. A second thing is we're conscious that we have almost no Indigenous presence through art. So through Indigenous art, we want to tell the story of the rich background and also celebrate entrepreneurship in Canada and honor the role of Indigenous artists and entrepreneurs. It's extremely difficult during COVID to make a living as an artist of any kind right now, and so we will intensify our efforts to acquire Indigenous materials and support the community and also have a presence that feels welcome. We have just completed our first summer of Indigenous admissions, where we had a special committee that addressed systemic barriers and educational gaps between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Canadians to increase access to Indigenous students and drop a lot of the barriers. And I'm very, very pleased that that has been going well. Michael and Sana and others within our faculty have we have opened a pathway, and I want that to continue to open. We're offering, the fourth thing is Indigenous cultural awareness. Partly this program, everybody who has logged on is to be congratulated for their curiosity and open-mindedness. We know that we don't know, right? We know that we don't know, but we are wanting to learn more. And so we want to open our minds to the kinds of lessons that we can actually adapt and offer to our students, whether it's through guest speakers, whether it's through small amounts of knowledge, whether it is through opening our minds to large amount of curriculum change. Anything we do is better than the nothing that we've been doing for a long time. And finally, we're offering financial skills workshop for Indigenous entrepreneurs. During the powwow of 2019, we offered spaces in boot camps to vendors and Indigenous entrepreneurs, and we will continue working with Chief Laforme on how to broaden and open the doors to what we're routinely offering our students and make sure that more people are included. And it will be particularly important to the City of Toronto's Indigenous Centres for Innovation and Entrepreneurship that are going to be opening. We want to make sure that we are partners in there. So that's what we're doing. And it sounds like a lot, and it is not enough.
I appreciate you giving us the overview of the work you've been about. I also know that you're very interested in calling back your alumni and current students to hear about their experiences. And today really is to build on this beginning work. And because of the relationship that you've begun with Chief Laforme, it would be good to build on those particular initiatives. Chief Laforme, in my opening remarks, I talked about the fact that we're living through a pandemic. And I know that in my own community, you know, the need to look back to see what can help us with today. I'm wondering if you've done some of that same reflection. How has this pandemic impacted your community and how have you responded?
Well, I'd like to answer that in a second, but I'd like to go back to some of the points that were just made about all the things that are happening. You know, I wish I had a pen in front of me because there was about 5 or 6 things there that I would love to comment on. And if we have more time, maybe we can go back and look at some of those things you're developing, like the garden. You know, I spend a lot of time in Toronto and other cities based upon the fact that I have to talk to and travel out to treaty lands and territories and events. And sometimes I'm overwhelmed by the circumstances around me. And I remember a few years ago when I was in Toronto, I called an elder and said, I just don't understand what's going on. I just don't feel quite like myself. I feel a little overwhelmed. There's a lot of issues. I've been into every meeting and, you know, several meetings, and I'm feeling just not myself. And it may sound funny to people, but she told me, and it was a lady, she told me, well, remember who you are. You know, go find some part of nature that's in the city still and just ground yourself with your connection to the nature. So I found a tree that was just on the sidewalk and surrounded by little fences. You've all seen them. And I went and leaned against a tree and touched it for a little while and just breathed and thought. And, you know, I felt so much better and so more at peace. It's the same thing. If you've ever been to our powwow, you know that we have the dancing and drumming inside a grove of trees, as well as our Veterans Monument is there. And when I feel that I need more, to think more, to relax, to lessen the anxiety, I sometimes go out into the grove and relax. Just breathe, and that connection that we all have with nature, with the world, Mother Earth, is still there. And I think, you know, the garden that you're having will have so many different purposes. You know, it can be used as knowledge. It can be used to reawaken the connection that's with everybody. But it'll so help the students and faculty when they're having times of turmoil, so they can just relax and reconnect with nature. So I think, you know, that in of itself is a really good step to take with regards to your college. So my kudos on that. I know if I can be of a benefit with that, I'd be happy to. And the other thing you talked about was when you talked about the entrepreneurs and the arts. But I'll get back to that. I'll go answer the question I was asked. This is probably why I don't get invited to a lot of these. I have a tendency to get off topic. Um,
Actually, I wouldn't mind hearing if you have some thoughts around the idea about the entrepreneurship. I mean, definitely today was to really provide
okay.
the opportunity for you to comment and to provide.
So, okay, let me say that with the entrepreneurships, I don't know if everybody's aware, but I have worked with a counselor in Toronto. We talked about an Indigenous district early on, maybe a few years ago, and we both had ideas of how we'd like to see it worked and developed. And the Entrepreneur Center, you know, was something that's being worked on right now, Indigenous Entrepreneur Center, and it's being built, and it's going to have access for Indigenous people, and you know, so that's a small part of what came out of that whole concept of Indigenous district. It's not an idea it's dead. It's not dead, but it's been sort of changed. The idea of the Entrepreneur Center is a great one, and I'm glad that's occurring, and it occurred with the support of the other organizations in Toronto that do similar things, but not specifically to the Indigenous population. So we had their input and their advice, and the Entrepreneur Center will be developed. That was with Councillor Wong Tam in Toronto. And there are other hubs coming forward. There is, I forget Joseph's last name, but there is a grassroots movement from the Indigenous entrepreneurs in Toronto, whereby I remember when they had their first meeting, because Joseph invited me, and I came, and there was like 3 or 4 people there. And then I came to another meeting maybe 6 months later, and there were 30 people there. And then I talked to him again later on, and there were 60 people there, Indigenous entrepreneurs on the ground, and they created Indigenous Business Association, grassroots from the ground, built it up and starting to build on that. You know, and that's very important. You know, there are other organizations like Canadian Council of Aboriginal Business who do great work and are involved with Indigenous entrepreneurs and development, but they sort of focus on organizations and businesses, and you know, in some part the small businesses too, but they sometimes miss the grassroots entrepreneurs that are in the cities themselves. And you know, when people vote and they talk about what's needed, they might go to the large organizations or different things, but they should always make sure that they also talk to the grassroots people who are doing that work themselves, because that's very important, because they come up against bylaws and, you know, racism and different things every day that stop them or slow them down in their progress. But they are there and they're always working towards a better way of life. And so that's one area I like to support whenever I can. Also, there's many other agencies in Toronto, and while I'm not necessarily a board member or, you know, leading the charge in front, whenever I'm asked or whenever I can do anything, I always try to lend my support, whether that's in meeting with the city or the province or whoever, because, you know, I believe in partnerships and I believe in relationship building, and those are fundamental principles for me. And so that's some of the entrepreneurship that I've been involved with in Toronto. Certainly there's other things as well, but I'd like to say that there are so many talented Indigenous people in the cities, yes, but also in their community. You know, whether it's arts and craft or whether it's a small business opportunity or whatever it is, they have so much talent, but they have no access to market. And that is the big issue. And I believe we should focus on that. I believe there needs to be a strategy, and I believe we need to have partners come together and create a strategy that opens up the cities and the opportunities to market for entrepreneurs who live in rural communities, who live in isolated communities. You know, pay them good money for their products, what they deserve, take it to market, and not only to the Canadian market, but to the international market. There are countries that would love to have access to a continual stream of entrepreneurship that as the Indigenous people have. And that's something that could be done. Now, I know a focus is on the internet. And well, most people would say now, because you're young and smart and have access to the internet, you were born in that age. But the evolution of entrepreneurship went from rural, selling out of my house, to these peoples, to a little bit of success I sold in this town. And then maybe as the world evolved, big cities access things from us and they sold them. And then from there, the evolution was to the internet. You can write these on there from your home and get used to this. And all of a sudden, the internet supplies the world for things. You don't have to go to a certain location. But I think the physical idea of a building someplace in a city, Mississauga, Toronto, wherever it could be, Milton, Niagara Falls, is important to the evolution of the Indigenous people's entrepreneurship. I know that for many people now, they just jump from product idea to the internet and to online marketing and sales. But that's because they were born into this world. Their parents or their generation before them went through this evolution to get to where they can now jump to. The Indigenous people, that has been a lot less of that that ability to get our wares out there and have that location in a city, and then to move to the internet. So while I believe that the internet is great and absolutely has value and uses, I also think there's some value for the Indigenous people to have Indigenous sites in the city, not only for the entrepreneurship, but so much of the culture and the heritage comes with that, and so much of the teaching. So I think it's important to have that physical space as well when it comes to entrepreneurship. Now, the other thing that you talked about was the arts and, contributing to the arts. It's funny, I just read a survey on Facebook, and it must be true because it's on Facebook. So the survey on Facebook said, what is the least essential service in the world? And the answer was the arts. Now, to me, that screams that we are not advanced enough in our thinking. We are not out of the box enough in our thinking, because arguably, in a crisis like this, the arts are not as essential as other things. But if you have children and you look at what they're doing during this crisis, they're drawing, they're singing, they're creating, they're building things. They're using the arts to deal with this environment that they have no idea what it is, something they've never had to face before. And the arts, they may not call them the arts, but the arts are a method that they are using, whether it's the language, the drums, dance, singing. Those things are important, and they're using those. And I bet there are a lot of people, who are listening today that use the arts themselves as a means to deal with the trauma and the crisis, the pandemic that surrounds us, that use the arts to deal with the hurt and the pain of racism that we face in this world. So, to me, to have the arts as the least essential service is in my mind, demonstrating that we have not evolved broadly enough in our thinking about, what we really need in our lives. Because I truly believe that at some point in time, the arts are going to be what carries us forward. I said before that it won't be politicians or warriors who decide the future. It'll be the artists, the singers, the dancers, the people that can communicate, that can bridge languages, that can bridge races, that can conquer divides of racism. Those types of things are very important. So, I'm very happy that the arts are being supported by this. I have been called an artist because of my poetry writing and things of that nature, and I recognize the value in it. But when I see my children doing things, I really recognize the value. in that. No, I'm happy to talk more about any one of those areas if you wish during the course of this conversation, or certainly I have my own ideas about partnerships and entrepreneurships and the opportunities that many of the cities in Southern Ontario are missing out on. You know, in my mind, I would make a connection, and I've started this, make a connection with all the points of entry to the cities, whether that be the water, the airports, or whatever, form those relationships and drive the new visitors to the entrepreneur sector, to the cultural aspect, to the Indigenous side of the market of things. And I think there's a real opportunity in that itself, you know, tied to many other relationships and partnerships that can really evolve that situation. But now the first question I was asked was, how's my community with the pandemic? And like everybody else, we were caught, maybe it's our own lack of vision, but we were caught unprepared for the pandemic, even though we saw it forming in other parts of the world. And we immediately took actions to try and protect ourselves, make sure that everybody knew, you know, what the virus was capable of, how real it was, and to try and take steps to maintain our safety. So we did the whole, you know, 6 feet apart, masks in public, sanitizers. You know, our buildings have now the plastic divide for security members and staff. We've, you know, we've asked that people limit gatherings to, and now it's just recently ours went up to 10. Prior to that, it was 5. We're not so much following the provincial guidelines as we are just observing them. You know, sometimes we'll be ahead of the province in regards to our school closure. We closed our schools about maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks before the province did. And now we're looking at how do we educate our kids in a system that's going to be impacted by this pandemic, and for how long. You know, we've been using the same thing for education as many others. What's on the internet, you know, dropping off things for the children in the community. But there's a problem in that because, as you know, rural communities struggle with internet connection, and Indigenous communities struggle even more so because some of them are isolated, some of them more northern, and even here we struggle with really poor internet. And you know, we all know that Indigenous people in the education system are years behind the Canadian standards. And I'm afraid that if we're going to be utilizing tools of a technological nature to try and move our children forward, we're going to face with bigger gaps because we lack the technological support in our areas, and certainly in the north and in remote communities, to compete at that same level and have that same access to educational information as the rest of Canadian society has. And so I can see that gap growing. You know, I mean, it'll take a huge influx of capital to bring us up to where we need to be to have a chance of competing in the new world, if that's the way it goes. Certainly we're talking about opening up our school. Now my school is overcrowded as it is. I shouldn't say this, but we have about 130 kids that go to the on-reserve school or can. We're projecting about 160, and our school has been built for 100 or 105. So, you know, when we're going back to school, if we're talking about social distancing, if we're talking about smaller classes, you know, less students, more teachers, all those things come with a large cost. And so that's another issue we're going to have to face with regards to teaching our students. I'm also right now asking my COVID team, who's the emergency team, to look at the possibility of not starting our school until after Christmas break, only because so many experts out there are saying that this fall, this winter, we're going to see another resurgence of the pandemic, and it's going to be worse than the first one. I don't know if that's true. I hope not. But one of the things we're considering is the impact on the students and the impact on our daycare, on those types of things. So, you know, this crisis, you know, we were already struggling with how do we get the education system on par with Canadian society. You know, somebody said, well, let's just make them equitable so that First Nations now get the same amount as off reserve. Well, there's a gap like this right now. And if you keep giving people the same amount of money, you'll keep just raising the gap. So you have to have needs-based funding that can actually close the gap and move things closer together. And now here we are talking about a new type of education that would potentially even spread the gap a little wider, potentially. Okay, I feel like I've been talking too long now. I better shut up. I'll take a break.
Thank you, Chief Laforme. You've raised some really critical issues that certainly the folks at Ryerson, certainly within my own team, thinking about support to Indigenous students. You've raised all of the critical priorities that we've been bringing to the attention. It's not enough to think that you're making the announcement that learning will go online without having to think about the challenges for folks that don't have access to the tools. So to move away from this thought of, you know, a level playing field, our student center provides the space for students to come and access computers. One of the first things that we did was to contact every student, not only to find out how they were doing, but really to talk about their priorities. And as you were talking, you know, you were highlighting some of the Indigenous values that are core to how work needs to be thought of. You know, the values of kindness and compassion, respect. You talk about it's not only thinking about access. It's really the fact that access in itself becomes a gap. And these are all important considerations that you're sharing, not only with the Dean, but with everyone who is listening, that, you know, you can't move ahead in a partnership unless you put all of these things on the table, and you did that very well. Dean Taras, do you want an opportunity to offer some comments?
There's a number of things Chief Laforme discussed, and I want to weave a little bit of a braid through a theme. In a past province, I brought 87. A donor donated 87 some of them large, some of the ancient sculptures, and we created an art gallery for business students. And we said art comes to business. Art and business are in partnership. There is no difference between art and business. That seeing opportunities, seeing beauty, seeing art, it's the same train, you know, art meets the prepared mind, business meets the prepared mind. And what was very interesting about the gallery, the non-Indigenous art curator wanted to do it as a, you know, you put a glass wall over it and you put it on one wall and people come and ooh and ah. And I said, absolutely not. It has to be, no student should be more than 3 or 4 feet from where there is a piece of beautiful art. And we separated it and we stationed it. And at one time, students used to go into that part of the school and it felt like they were getting their teeth pulled. They were waiting for the classes to open and they were sitting on dental chairs, and they weren't looking at each other and there was no serenity at all. They just looked like anxious students. Once the art was there was such a sense of calm. People would come, they would sit, they would study, they would talk to each other, a tremendous sense of beauty and calm. But the interesting thing is I would go in there and I would tap a student on the shoulder and said, are you enjoying the art? What are you seeing? Are you looking at the art? Do you know how much work went into getting that art here? You know, I was almost arrested in North Carolina, South Carolina for importing, like, I was trying to repatriate Canadian art from Florida, and the story was unbelievable. And then the students would say, what art? It was incredible. They would say, what art? And I would say, well, look 3 feet away. There's an incredible, you know, Indigenous drum dancer. Like, have you not noticed a 3-foot-high drum dancer? They go, no. And it was very disappointing until I realized that they were attracted to the space for reasons that have to do with the environment that was created. So I learned a very valuable lesson, is that people don't necessarily ooh and ah, and they won't necessarily touch the, you know, what was native plants that grew here that were used for medicine, but they will feel it. You know, they will feel it nonetheless, and I think it's extremely important for it to be in the environment. And I think business schools should be supporting the arts because they go together. So that was one thing I wanted to say. It's not like we'll have big ceremonies and there will be a big piece of art and it will transform it will just change the feeling of the place. You know, it'll open the mind. With regard to the gap, the gap is so problematic, you know, and I've been to on reserve schools, and I've gone to, you know, at least in Saskatchewan, the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technology, and looked at people come in from reserve to urban areas, and it's an extremely difficult relocation, you know, and there's all kinds of risks. But I have a good piece of news, that once people have made the transition to, you know, and maybe it's with smaller classroom and more tutoring, but after a year or two and you finish the certificate program and you get through, the success rate of Indigenous students was actually a little higher than the success rate of white urban students. So when we actually tracked it, the success rate in graduation with a Bachelor's of Commerce was very high. So the retention was high, and partly it's because the Indigenous students were a little bit older. You know, maybe they were more mature. Partly a lot of them had children. And there's something wrong with our curriculum and our model where we're not open to the fact that there are demographic differences. And so the first time I went to an Indigenous graduation and I saw a student who took 7 years to get an undergraduate degree. And I had only heard professors talk about how many times he repeated math or how difficult it was. And he graduated holding 3 young children. And at that point, I burst into tears. And I realized how hard it was for him to get through an undergraduate degree that was designed for single kids, no dependents, no problems with their parents, no dissent of the family, of the elders on the younger students to solve a problem, no sense of this large organic community. And he had achieved something that was unbelievable. And he had been treated like a problem by the educational system rather than someone who was a triumph of the system. And so I think the more we can be open to the differences and different paths, the success was exactly the same. So even though the original gaps were huge, there were ways of closing the gap. So by the time advanced education opened the doorways, which Michael and Santa are working on opening the doors, by the time the doorway was open, the success rate was the same. But we can't, our problem at the universities is we're having a hell of a time fixing what goes wrong with the intermediate grades. With, you know, between grade 7 and grade 12, there is a world of hurt. And when I saw the most beautiful Indigenous students on reserve, grade 5, as bright as you can imagine. And then I went into a grade 12 class and there was one student left who clearly had fetal alcohol syndrome. And I said to us, what happened to all of those beautiful high potential children between grade 5 and grade 12? And so I don't know how we can make a partnership, Chief Laforme, to create the, the intake into university. The other problem is between grade 5 and grade 12, there's so many businesses right now that are trying to hire high school graduates to do, their equity business, and they're taking them away from university. So I had an idea that, maybe we could talk about a reverse co-op with your standard urban privileged white kids. A lot of them have not had the opportunity to work. So our co-op people are working really, really hard on getting them jobs. And with a lot of the mining companies, the larger companies who are scooping up Indigenous youth into employment, they're taking them out of the university system. And maybe we could do a reverse co-op where in the summer, or using all of the really good technologies that we have now to address the gap, we could give experiences and we could get people trained. I had people from First Nations complaining to me that all that we're doing is creating the worker bees. A lot of our interventions are creating the worker bees. And we want to create managers. We want to create role models. We want lawyers. We want accountants. We don't want to be trapped in the apprenticeship and lower skills. We want the talent to rise. And we're having problems with getting the education. And I really would like to sort of work on that problem, that issue, which is demographically completely different than the issue of having urban kids, white kids, young immigrant kids, first generation kids, different and unique problem. People are so anxious to employ Indigenous youth that they're actually taking them out of employment. I'm sorry, out of education. What do we do about that?
If I can just interrupt the both of you, yeah. I'm looking at our time and we're at 10 minutes to.
Oh, already.
We did agree that we would have some questions from folks. I think you've both said it. This was just a taste of further conversation. You've identified priorities and possible areas to work on. From earlier, we were talking about curriculum. Certainly you've identified some key areas that need to be included in curriculum. Talking about the impact of racism, looking at, I'm thinking about this new term that's being used around social procurement. You're addressing some really difficult and challenging barriers that have existed for Indigenous people for a very long time. So I just want to say that I don't think that this will be your only conversation. Sana, are there any questions? Because if we don't have any, then I would like to provide Chief Laforme the opportunity to respond to the Dean's comments.
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, she raised so many issues. You raised the issue of Canadian society, new immigrants to the world and just Canadian world, Indigenous people. And so you have so many issues and so many different things that play upon each other there that we could have a conversation on just on that for days. But I want to say, when you're talking about your own organization and at your level and about making changes and things of that nature, we have a habit of fixing things inside our little silos. And when you fix things inside your silos, you may get things to go through and work, but you don't fix anything because the issues are broader than that. So, it's going to take an overall organizational shift, not just certain academic sectors. It requires fundamental shift in ideologies over the whole college, and that's how you look at real issues. And one thing I got to say, and I must say this, is when we look to make the world better for Indigenous people, and we do, because there are different issues and treaty lands and the people who were here originally, but we cannot forget about those other nations who are here, who are marginalized, who face some of the same issues Indigenous people face, because that'll create a divide. And the worst thing for our people is to have another divide. And so we need to understand that, yes, we need to make things better for the Indigenous people, but we need to make things better for everybody, for all the minorities, for everybody that's involved in this country called Canada. So I just hope we keep that in mind, that everything we're doing is striving to make us all better. It's very important that everybody has the opportunity to see themselves in the world that surrounds them.
Okay. We do have some comments to share. The participants want to say thank you to both yourself, Chief Laforme, and to Dean Taras. And there was a resounding yes to the support of the arts. I think as we're looking to close our time together, we know that you're a poet, Chief Laforme, and often I would provide a closing. I think that would be a wonderful way to close us out, is for you to share one of your poems.
Can I just want to say, I don't know if everybody knows this, but I'm also the honorary senior fellow to Massey College. And a few months ago, I was thinking about the faculty and the students, and I wrote an open letter to Massey College, but I didn't really just write it to them. I wrote it to everybody. I mean, I wrote it for them, but it really applies to all of us. And I wanted to just read a little bit of it if I could, and then maybe give you a poem if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I started by, I said, I hope you're all safe. I want you to know you're in my thoughts and prayers. This is a difficult time for everyone, made worse so because of the racism and discrimination that is a large part of our world. See, my people fight for our place in Canada every day, from poverty and discrimination, missing and murdered women, suicides, theft of our children. It is a struggle for us, and we will prevail because we must. Yet I never forget that we are not the only ones struggling with violence and hate in Canada and the world. I will always stand and support my brothers and sisters who struggle in a world that doesn't embrace diversity. I shudder to think of a world where we are all the same. Uniqueness and diversity are how we grow, how we become better today, better tomorrow than we were today. We need to be heard. You see, the voice that is prominent is one of isolation and fear. It teaches hate and contempt. If we allow it to be the only voice, then soon there will be no room for any other voice. We must stand, and our voice of unity and inclusiveness must be heard. We cannot be silent. We must show the people of this world that there's a stronger voice that must be heeded, one of unity, inclusion, and love. We must say, you do not represent us. You are not who we of this world are, for we cannot leave the fate of our children, our future, in the hands of those who teach fear, divisiveness, and hate. I included a poem in that I'll read to you called On Common Ground. No one thing can define us, for we are complex creatures, dreamed in the mind of the Creator. We laugh when we should cry. We cry when we should laugh. We joke when in pain. We smile because tears could consume us. We love unconditionally and totally. We understand that family should come first, yet family is not defined solely by blood. We are quick to anger, yet no one forgives faster. We are loyal and we are strong. When we commit, we are unwavering. We have survived much, but do not mistake adaptation for resignation. You will always see us, for we will always be here, standing for what we believe in, standing beside each other, doing what is right for our children, our future. We remember our obligation to our Mother the Earth, and we remember our place upon her. We are a proud people, an honorable people. We do not always do right, for we are human and prone to the follies of humanity. Yet we strive to be better, to make each other better, to make the world a better place for the children. I know the Creator smiles upon us, no matter where we are or what we do, for the love of a child is unconditional. No matter where life takes you, walk proud.
Those were beautiful words. A good way to end today. I just want to say that, as I began earlier, that this is the inaugural event that TRSM will be hosting through the months of July and August. And we hope that you will continue to join the upcoming events. I'd like to finish by saying thank you to both of you for your time, for your thoughtfulness, and the fact that there is much that you've both placed in the midst on the table to be picked up and to be talked about, and to decide together what is important to work for this relationship. Any last words from both of you?
I want to thank you, Monica, for emceeing us and asking tough, important questions. And I know that for faculty and staff who are listening, you don't have to be an expert. Like, there is a fear that we don't know enough, and we might be mischievous. We might create more harm than good because we're just so ignorant. We can invite guest speakers. We can reach out to the community. We don't have to. It's not the same as the academic model where we become expert. There is expertise, and we should be reaching out to it. And for those of you who are already doing it, bravo. And for those of you, please empower yourselves to reach out. It is very easy to make connections, and people are eager to get to know and build a relationship, as Chief Laforme and I are trying to do now. Thank you.
Can I just say that I really appreciate the time, and it went way too fast. I talk too much, but it went way too fast. I would have enjoyed spending a lot more time having a lot more broader conversation. Just let me end by saying that thank you to everybody that was involved, but saying that, you know, partnerships and relationships are the way of the future. Competitions are what they are, but when you have a competition, you have one winner. When you have a partnership and a relationship, everybody wins. Tumigwitch, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Whitney. I want to also share with you that the next event will be with Todd Labrador, who will be talking about building birch bark canoes on July 14th. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and look forward to this ongoing conversation.
Thank you.
Bye.
Lama Pi.